let's talk about my favourite topic. Law. Okay, more specifically, licensing. A topic that has come up with a lot of controversies recently, namely the Unofficial Bridgerton musical and what we will dub illegal Hamilton. Today I'm going to talk to you and tell you what licensing is, what protections licensing gives, and what it doesn't give you. And then I'm going to link that to the two big controversies in the community right now. So, I have a little bit of experience with licensing and what this means, but I am not a lawyer. And I'm also specifically from England. What I'm going to be talking about today will be generalised. Not everything applies in every country, or even when we're talking about America, in every single state. Copyright law is very finicky, and it can be different everywhere. Please do not use this video as legal advice. I am just a theatre fan wanting to get to the bottom of some of these controversies that have been going on in our community at the moment. With that said, and my back covered, again, not legal advice. I'm flashing it on screen right now. This is, please do not use this as legal advice. Also, if you haven't seen my face before, hi, I'm Ellie. I talk about theatre. I mostly do reviews of lovely theatre-y things, but sometimes I also talk about this stuff. So if you want to see me talk more about this stuff, why don't you hit like and hit subscribe? It really helps me out and helps out the channel. And also, why wouldn't you? Anyway, let's start. Now, here is Licensing 101. Whenever you want to put on a production of a play or a musical, you need explicit permission from the playwright and the producers that you can do this. This is the same whether you're a school putting on a production, a youth group, an amateur society, or even a professional company trying to put something on Broadway, the West End, or touring in regional productions. For already existing shows, there is a clear process of how you would obtain the license to put on this show. You would specifically go to a licensing company. Now, in the UK, we have a couple. We have Concord, also sometimes known as Samuel French. We have Nick Hearn Books, who do a lot of plays. Our biggest one is probably MTI, and you work with these companies to plan your show, how long you're going to do your show for, and you would work out the fee that you would pay for that license. This doesn't just give you a free pass to do whatever you want with the show. There are a lot of stipulations that come with this. I'm going to walk you through a couple of these now. To protect the original work, you cannot change it in any way. The only way that you can do this is if you get direct permission from the original writer. A great example of this would be, I remember hearing a story about a production of In the Heights. And of course, the original book, Two in the Heights, has the line in 96,000 that refers to Donald Trump. Of course, now we obviously have a very different view on Donald Trump than the artist originally intended when the show was written in 2008. So if you wanted to change the line from Donald Trump to, say, Tiger Woods, as they do in the film now, you would contact the licensing people, and they would then go forward with what you would like to change, contact the writer, and the writer will say yes or no, and if they say yes, they will come back with some suggestions. That would be your direct permission that you can change a line. There's quite a few examples of this where it has worked. I also remember Heathers talking about a school production where they wanted to cast JD as a woman. And they worked with Lance O'Keefe, they worked with the scriptwriters, the songwriters, to make sure that it would work naturally. So they properly worked on changing the song so it would fit in a female vocal a bit better, and they actually actively worked to change the show for this one production. Without that direct permission, though, you are not allowed to change anything. No cutting songs because you don't like them, no changing random lines of dialogue. Sometimes the writer will write in the front of the script that you were allowed to change something. Like, I remember doing a couple of plays where it said, don't worry about gender. You're allowed to change the names of the characters depending on who you cast. That would also count as direct permission. However, it's most likely that you would have to contact the company and they would in turn, contact the writer. When it comes to filming your production, this is usually a no-no. Most shows do not allow you to film your production without an added license, and most shows don't even have this license available. Reasons this might not be available is the filming rights have already been sold to a big company. Think how Universal has the rights to Wicked, how they've just made it in the Heights film, or you're thinking more like Pro Shots. You probably wouldn't be able to make a Pro Shot of Come From Away, Bonnie and Clyde, Hamilton, Heathers Now. All of these shows that already have a professional filmed performance, those filming rights have already been given to these companies, so you're not allowed to sell them on to an amateur society. And even if you do manage to get this additional license, which you'll be paying an additional fee for, you're not allowed to sell DVDs, and you're not allowed to put it on public sites like YouTube. You're allowed to make a set number of copies, and you're only allowed to distribute them to your cast and crew. And even with all of that, it's not even a guarantee that the license will be available when you want to do it. The availability of the license will always depend on your location. For a UK-centric example of this, it's usually not the case that you're allowed to put on a show that's currently in the West End. Usually the exception to this is schools. Schools are allowed to put on like school versions of shows for the additional fee. Like, I know that there's school versions of Les Mis, but usually if you're an amateur society or a youth group, if it's in the West End or it's touring, no go. Or if it's coming to the West End, the rights to a very specific show, which I'm not going to mention right now, have not been available for a very long time because there is a planned West End production of it coming, and they just keep pushing it back. So the license is just still not available, and it hasn't been available for a very long time. It's a nice way to be able to pinpoint what shows might be coming to the West End in a big revival soon.
Also, if a show has not had a professional production in your country, this may also mean that the rights won't be available until they do a professional premiere.
But even with that said, if another youth group around you is doing the show as well, you have to do it at a different time. Let's say, for example, you are the Liverpool Youth Centre and you want to put on a production of Shrek the Musical. However, the Liverpool Musical Theatre Society is also wanting to put on Shrek the Musical. You would probably have to make sure your dates don't clash, and they probably have a decent amount of time between the two doing them. Licenses are expensive and they're complicated. You can't just band together and put on a production of Wicked in your back garden, because if you are specifically putting on a performance of a musical or a play to an audience, even if you are not charging, even if you are doing it for a charity, you need a license, and you need to pay for that license. When it comes to charity, there have been cases where the artists have kind of given up their cut that they would normally get from you putting on their production, so more money can go towards the charity, but this isn't always a given. And with all of that said, that is only really mostly applicable to already existing shows. And most of that is very specifically referring to amateur productions. If we were going to talk about, say, you wanting to put on your own musical adaptation of an already existing TV show, wink wink nudge nudge, the licensing gets even more complicated, because that would most likely be seen as a professional thing. Because the musical doesn't really exist, they probably wouldn't let an amateur production get that license. So if you've got the most amazing script for a musical version of the Boss Baby. So if you've written the most amazing script and music to a musical version of the Boss Baby, you've probably got to do that professionally and get the license from DreamWorks. Why did I specifically choose Boss Baby? I don't... Just the idea of a musical Boss Baby makes me laugh so much. Honestly, I could see it happening. Typically for this, you would have to get the license directly from the rights holders. You would have to knock on Netflix's door and go, hello, we want to do this. Is it an idea that you'd be interested in? And it would be a big board meeting, and they go yes or they go no. You can't really just make your own version and label it as unofficial. However, there is an exception to this, and that is parody and fair use. There are examples of this all around, of musical versions of copyrighted material that kind of get away with it because of the protections for parody. For example, the Friends musical, or the Office musical parody that was off Broadway. These were able to make musical versions of already existing copyrighted material under these protections that parody law gives. Now, because to parody something, to make fun of something, to give a commentary on something, you've really got to refer to the original thing. There's a lot of protections for this, and it would be classed as fair use. There's a lot of examples of what fair use gives. For example, if I was making a review, and I, for example, had to show a clip from the Les Mis film, this would be protected under fair use, because to talk about the film, I have to show a little clip. Because my video changes something or gives something different, it gives a different experience than watching the original film, it would be classed as fair use. Because to be protected under fair use, it has to be transformative. A review is giving a take and an opinion on a film. To use clips in that and to talk about the copyright material is protected because it is fair use, it is transformative, it is a different experience. Putting on your own production of Wicked, you are essentially getting a very similar experience if you went to see Wicked on the West End. You need a license because that is not fair use. That's my explanation of fair use. Parody links to this through fair use. To make fun of something, you have to use the original source to kind of talk about it. You're probably going to refer to some lines of dialogue, twist them in a certain way to kind of add some commentary on them. And another thing, it doesn't need to be a good parody. It doesn't need to be funny because that kind of stuff is what? Subjective! So, if we take the Office parody, for example, you're making fun of a typically known thing, you're making it your own, you've got your own music, sure, you're referring to a couple of lines of dialogue, you've got all the characters from the original, but you are technically making it your own while also poking fun at the original. This would probably most likely be seen as a good version of parody. A good example of this within the musical itself would be casting Michael Scott as a female. That could be seen as a parody of his tendencies as a boss, his kind of blatant sexism with his jokes, and that's what she said. That's an interesting twist that kind of lands in that parody law. Now, that's my legal jargon. How does this, in turn, relate to the Unofficial Bridgerton musical and the legal Hamilton? Well, we started with the amateur stuff, so let's talk about the amateur production of Hamilton that the Texas Church put on. Now that we know more about these laws, we can kind of talk about what they did, and I will have a little counter of every time they broke the law. So, on August 5th, a church in Texas put on their own production of Hamilton without a license. This is a show that, to my own knowledge, doesn't even have their licensing available at the moment. They have changed various lines in the production to give it a more underlining religious message. Cool motive, still illegal. And they filmed the entire production and promptly put it on their YouTube. Just, casually flaunting to a YouTube audience that they had casually broken a lot of laws. And just in case there was any doubt, this would not be protected under parody law. It is mostly the entire show. It is not transformative enough to be considered that. It's not a parody because they are being properly serious about the religious stuff in there. It's not designed to be a social commentary on the original. So they were promptly, given their cease and desist. They were told to cancel the rest of the performances except the one that was happening the day after. They were allowed to do that one with a couple of stipulations. However, in the future, they had to cancel all the performances and the film production had to be taken down. The only thing about this that was technically legal was their sermon afterwards, which featured a strong anti-LGBTQ message. They really said, let's just break every law while we're at it. There was no redeeming this production. They had no license. They changed the script. They literally did everything you're not allowed to do. It was a clear, open and shut case. And honestly, I'm surprised they didn't take more action on it. This church got off easy. When it comes to Bridgerton and the Unofficial Bridgerton musical, it's a bit more complicated, but as we kind of go on and see what they did and went on further, we kind of see where they broke copyright law. The videos on TikTok, in my unlawyer opinion, would probably be protected under fair use. It's taking a little bit of the TV show and making it your own. Because it could be argued that it's transformative, because it could be argued that it is mostly the artist's own work, it could be strongly argued that these videos are fair use. The album is where we get a bit more murky. Now you've got songs going through the whole TV show, and I think it's quite hard to argue that the Unofficial Bridgerton musical is protected under parody law, because it's not a social commentary, it's not providing any commentary on the original, it's not poking fun, so I don't think it would be protected. I don't think they could properly argue that it's a parody. Again, they could be able to possibly argue that it's transformative, and yes, in some cases you could see that it is. However, it's probably not. However, one song, yes, it's easier to argue that's transformative. You're getting a different experience watching that than watching the TV show, and both can exist at the same time. But when you've got the whole thing being a musical, every single plot point being a different song on an album, that's a little bit harder to argue. But they could probably argue it. And then they started to grow and started to stage concerts.
And live shows could be argued harm Netflix's financial gain from their Bridgerton live experience. If a parody harms a copyright holder's potential market value, it could lose its status as fair use under US law.
They kind of flew too close to the sun, really. It drew too much attention from Netflix, and what happened. And what's more, according to the lawsuit, Netflix did offer Barlow and Bear the license to put on their own production, but refused for whatever reason. Now, obviously right now it is Netflix words against Barlow and Bear. We haven't really heard much of their perspective on this, but if that's true, that's even more damning. At the end of the day, there are routes that Barlow and Bear could argue in court that their production would be labelled as fair use and is transformative enough. However, I think that is going to be a tough argument to sell. At the end of the day, licensing is tough. It's strict, but it's ultimately there to protect these artists. It kind of has to be this strict, otherwise the artists who originally made these musicals, who spent years and years pouring their heart and souls into making these shows, would get a very unfair deal. I think these situations happening so close to each other is very interesting, because these situations are quite similar, even if they do kind of go off in a different ways. At the end of the day, these are both productions that didn't get the license and clearly did not have the general support of the creatives and the producers. While the Hamilton case is seemingly closed, I am interested to see what happens with the lawsuit on Bridgerton, and I hope it's for the best. In a perfect world, we would see a case where the Bridgerton musical can go forward with an official license, where they can work together, but this stuff is complicated, and it can't always be worked out. Do I think they're going to win their case? I don't think so. I think Netflix have got this one. I think they took it a little bit too far for it to still be argued as a transformative piece of work. But what do you think? I'd love to hear all your opinions in the comments down below. And if you did enjoy this video, please like and subscribe. It really helps me out and helps out the channel. There's some links on screen to some other videos that I've made. But that's it for me today, and I'll hopefully see you next time. Bye!